Well, the pressure is really on AMD and Intel because ARM is the next big thing. And you're probably thinking, well, no, it isn't. Well, you'll see it is with this because this has the new Qualcomm Snapdragon X2 Elite Extreme, 18 cores. It does turbo up to 5 gigahertz, and we now have 2.3 times integrated graphics performance boost over the previous model. It is now a serious contender, and a spoiler here, this Asus ZenBook A16, its chipset, CPU performance-wise, is faster than the top Panther Lake that I covered in the ZenBook Duo 2026. So I'm really surprised to see just how well ARM is doing, and Qualcomm has upped their game massively.
And what's included? Well, we have our power supply. This is very compact and small, but very good. Power output, 130 watts. The power cable. Then the ZenBook A16. So we have the Cera aluminum finish. It's very resistant, and I love the fact that it doesn't really show any smudges or fingerprints. Now, you can carry the power supply with you, but it might not actually be needed in your normal workday because battery life on this with the 70 watt-hour battery is phenomenal. In my testing, around about 11 to 12 hours at 30% brightness in the standard mode. So that's great for if you're just doing some work stuff that's quite light. Now, if you go into something a bit heavier, that battery life is going to drop right off, and especially if you use the maximum performance. Now, the hinge does feel very good, and yes, you can open it up, as you can see clearly, with one hand. So not a problem. Nice backlit keyboard here. I have the Spanish layout. That's why it looks a little bit different here. And then the chipset, so that X2 Elite I talked about in the intro, 80 tops, up to 80 tops. It's got 18 cores and 5 gigahertz, so very powerful. Touchpad, really nice and large. It has what I think is a glass finish to it. Does support gestures, so they've got their own gestures for controlling volume and brightness and things, but you also have the Windows gestures too with this particular keyboard. Key travel is good, so 1.3 millimeters. The keys have a nice soft feel to them. They are not a loud clicky style key, and you can see the backlighting on this is very good. Now we do have 3 different levels, so we've got completely off, then the level 1, 2, that's the mid level, and the maximum brightness. And overall, good keyboard. Power button, yes, is part of the keyboard. I do wish it was separated, but I haven't accidentally tapped it here, which is good. And we do have the half-size arrow keys. That is common. I know it does bother some people. Myself personally, don't really have any problems with it. And pressing down really hard, there is a very tiny little bit of flex there, but you would not experience that under normal typing pressure. It's not going to be bouncy like a trampoline. Along the underside, we have 2 speaker vents here, grills at least. However, there are 6 speakers. We've got Dolby Audio, and here is a sample of what they do sound like. It's very good for a thin and light 1.2 kilo laptop. Now, good to see that Asus is sticking with plenty of ports on their laptop. So we have status LED, you can see flashing, 3.5mm with mic support, and 2 Type-C ports here. These are USB 4.0, so 40 gigabits, and they support power, data, and video out. So from this side, we can run 3 external monitors, which is excellent for the spec of laptop. And then if you take a look on the right, we've got a full-size standard SD card reader, and this is USB Type A 3.2 Gen 2. And finally, at the back, well, there are no ports at the front either. The thickness is at its thickest point, 16.5 millimeters, which is impressive for a 16-inch laptop. So one of the stars of this laptop is definitely this display. So this is an Asus Lumina OLED display, 120 hertz refresh. And it's 16 inches, 16 by 10 aspect ratio. Resolution is 2880 by 1800. It looks very crisp, detailed, great colors. It is glossy, that's the downside to it. and my particular screen does not support touch. So my Spider X has measured this, and we got 96% of Adobe RGB, and we also do have 100% of DCI-P3 color gamut coverage. So as expected for an OLED screen, brightness goes up to 1100 nits. So it is very bright, and overall great experience and really smooth at 120 hertz.
All right, looking at the webcam. So this is a full HD webcam, and we do have that infrared one. So yes, we've got Windows Hello support to log in without needing to type in a password, which is great. And the camera quality overall is looking excellent. So it's going to be good for those video conferencing calls or whatever that you may need for work or for study. And the microphones do sound good. Now, I do have it in just the standard mode, so there's no noise cancellation being applied at all.
So here we are in Windows. It is Windows 11 Home that the ZenBook A16 does come with. You'll see the RAM is 48 gigabytes, really quick. So we have 9,523 mega transfers. Those speeds are definitely going to aid the graphics and overall performance in general there. And we do have a terabyte of storage. Now, it is a Samsung drive, and of course, I've benchmarked it. You can see the speeds here. Reads of almost 7,000, very good. And the write's a little slow. Not the fastest I've seen, but still very acceptable speeds here. Now, speaking of speeds, things get a little bit crazy here when we take a look at the performance. This has just absolutely blown me away. Huge surprise on the performance uplift we have now with the new generation here from Qualcomm. So they've done an amazing job of taking this performance to the next level. I mean, I am shocked by this. We have single core scores here, the highest I've ever seen in a laptop. It's faster than Panther Lake even, and the multi-core score there is really good, so 22,000. Now, the great thing about this laptop and ARM is that when you unplug it, you get the same performance, and I mean the same, if not maybe even better, because look at this, the multi-core score is even higher slightly. That was on the battery. Now, to compare this to the previous generation, the ZenBook A14 with the Snapdragon X Elite that I covered, these are the scores. So we had 2,126 single core score, just over 10,000 multi. So that's the old model, and look at the new top end chip. What a massive difference. Double the performance, over double in the multi-core score, and almost with the single core score. So that's fantastic performance. Now, with other benchmarks here, this is the ZenBook Duo 2026 edition I reviewed that has the Panther Lake. And you can see that it is slower. The performance isn't as good as this new Qualcomm chip. So that's why I say I'm just blown away by this performance. Perhaps they are right. ARM really is the future here. And what about integrated graphics? This is where the other model, the Snapdragon X Elite, really suffered. And I'm happy to say that, yes, they have improved upon that performance. So Wildlife Extreme, over 11,000 points here for the integrated graphics, is very good, that Adreno chip. And if we compare that to what I got again in last year's A14 with the Snapdragon X Elite, well, that is a lot lower. So that's 3,214 versus the 11,000, over 11,000. That's a massive increase again. And what about Lunar Lake? How does that compare? So Lunar Lake will have an advantage. Lunar Lake with Time Spy, this exact test here, will be around 7,000 for the graphics score and over 7,000 in total. So this is where we fall behind still a little compared to Lunar Lake. But this is an excellent step up from, I believe it was about 1,000, just over 1,000 with the previous model. So now 4,538 graphics score of just over 4,000 with the Snapdragon X2 Elite Extreme. So benchmarks show us that performance is just a massive, huge jump up, and one of the fastest in terms of CPU performance laptops that I've ever covered. In fact, the fastest so far, according to these synthetic benchmarks. Now, Cinebench 2026, we can see here that we get a multi-core score here of 7,275 and 631 with a single core there. So the performance, very, very good here. How does that compare to Apple? Well, we are looking at a similar multi-core score here to the Apple M4 Max, the Apple Silicon, just a little bit behind that. So really impressed with what Qualcomm's been able to do in about a year's time. So I'm looking forward to the next refresh of this model, the ARM chips up and coming probably next year, that I'm sure will be even better, especially in terms of graphics performance. So this being an ARM chip, are there compatibility issues? No, I've been able to run absolutely everything. The x86 or x64 emulation is on point. It's very good. And apparently, according to Windows, there really is no performance hit. I don't quite believe that. I think there's still a very, very tiny performance hit. But what about things, productive things like video editing in 4K? So right now, this is one of my older videos where I look about 10 years younger because I almost am. Well, I think this was shot about 5 years ago. And the performance playback speeds here are excellent. So the Adreno integrated graphics is handling this just fine. And editing, simple kind of edits. This does not have well, it's not color graded, I believe. I think it's straight from my Sony. So these are 4K 100 megabit per second files. And the performance in general, timeline has been very, very quick. Now, when I do go to export, this is something I noticed with the previous model of the A series, the Snapdragon Qualcomm chips, is that we don't get hardware encoding. So if you scroll down, you'll see that it's software encoding only. It's grayed out. We're not allowed to support or doesn't support hardware encoding, unfortunately. So that's only going to be software. The speeds still, however, are pretty good because in my testing, which I'll do now, we'll just get 1 minute of footage. You'll still see that it's quite quick, but it will not be able to match that of, say, Intel with their quick sync support. And they also do have just the hardware support accelerating things in general. It's going to make it quite a bit faster. So I do have a minute of footage here. I'm going to run my typical test and we'll see how long it takes. So it is just finishing up now, and you see about 35, factoring in my delay, 34 seconds. So it is about 13 seconds slower than the Panther Lake or a Lunar Lake in encoding video. And that's, as I said, down to the fact that this is software encoding. It's not hardware encoding this, unfortunately. And I hope that support's going to come with Adobe, with Premiere Pro. This is 2026 version. Now, Chrome, spreadsheets, documents, all blazing fast. This has the fastest CPU performance I've tested in an Ultrabook or thin and light style laptop. But what about decoding something that's very difficult? That's exactly what I'm doing right now. And this is with the AV codec, AV01 in Chrome. And I'm streaming an 8K video here. You can see occasionally it's dropping a few frames, but most of the time it's very steady. So only 62 frames at the moment out of almost 5,000 now. That is absolutely perfect and fine. So it's decoding this natively. The Adreno integrated graphics handling this just fine. And as I move the mouse about, we might see a few more drop frames or resize it, which can sometimes happen, just one or two. So that's very common there. But fantastic performance in general with just your day-to-day computing with the ZenBook A16. So jumping into some gaming performance, Captain Obvious here that yes, of course, this is not a gaming laptop, but I wanted to see, is it going to be able to game on some of my favorite titles? Diablo 2 is one of my all-time favorites that I've been playing for 20 years now, this game, and we have Resurrected. So what about if I jump into just a little bit of gameplay here and we'll check out how this is going to run. So just quickly go into the lobby and we'll jump into any game and see how that performance is. Because the previous generations, the Snapdragon X Elite, I was very disappointed with the gaming performance. It just couldn't really handle things. So here we are at Act 5. I will just enable the frame counter so we can at least take a look at that performance. So 39 frames per second. This is running at the screen resolution, well, native here, so it's quite demanding. I can lower that down. Yes, it's playable for a game like this, but I was hoping for a little bit more in terms of performance here, because this is not exactly what I would call wonderful performance. I would love to have 60 the whole time. And now with the new Warlock character, let's take a look at just how this is going to perform. Okay, good, but we're still not really reaching an amazing frames per second here. But overall, this is playable. And if I was trying to kill a bit of time, I guess I would be happy enough with this. but I will lower the visuals down because I do believe that we can really improve upon this performance. So I can take the resolution scaling, and I've got it at 100% now, so I could drop that down to 70. This will probably bring us up to, I would say, 60 frames per second. Almost. So we're almost at 60 with quite a bit of action going on at the moment. So it does get better. We've taken a little bit of a hit there with the visuals, but overall, not bad, and good to see that I can happily play this game now with a decent frame rate, because this, on the old hardware, we would have been around about 15 frames per second. Not good at all. Something more demanding, this is GTA 5, the enhanced edition on the high preset, and I do have it set to 1080p, and I'm sure it's going to be able to play this game because it's quite lightweight. It is very old now, and it runs on most hardware. Very, very good, decent now frame rates that you should be able to achieve. So just get out of this, jump into some gameplay, of course. Now I see that already we're going at 120 frames per second, which is great. So at 1080p, we're going to be able to match the maximum refresh rate of our OLED screen. And that Lumina OLED, of course, looks absolutely fantastic. It'll be perfect for gaming. So good to see that we can play some old titles like this and have a bit of fun on the side in between those boring work meetings and whatnot that we may be using this laptop, because to me this is really orientated towards a work laptop with great battery life for schoolwork, for university and whatnot, people that may be using this for just sort of general computing needs, but it can still play well with decent kind of frame rate here. We're still over 100 frames per second in GTA 5, so that is really good. Again, a massive step up from the previous versions of this chipset, the older Snapdragon X Elite. Finally, one last title, The Witcher 3. This is at 1080p, high preset, and you can see, again, playable frame rate around 80, 90 frames per second. And really, in the dense areas, you will see a frame rate of around 60, 70 frames per second. I'm out in the open here, so it's a little bit better. So in those dense areas with a bit more going on, it will certainly take a little bit of a toll on that frame rate. But overall, very good for an ARM chip. I'm impressed. Qualcomm, again, hats off to them. They have just uplifted the performance of their whole ARM series of chips, especially this Elite Extreme, massively. And it was due. Yes, I think we needed this, especially to compete with AMD and Intel, and they certainly are. And moving over to our thermals, so it does get a little warm. I can see temperatures up to 95 degrees. According to this, it looks like it has not triggered thermal throttling. It's hard to tell now with these ARM chips because they are a little bit different, and I'm using the HW Info version for ARM64, and it will report here on pretty much everything, but thermal throttling I don't believe has happened. So I can see that the system ended up pulling, if this is correct or not, a total of 120 watts, which does explain our power supply we get with this. But we are looking on chipset maximum, so bear this in mind. This would be gaming, the benchmarks I've run, absolutely pushing it to the limit here of 85, around about, well, 82 on the chipset there. So yes, it's drawing a bit of wattage there, but in general, it tends to be a bit lower, quite a bit lower than the Intels and the AMDs with that wattage. So it's quite an efficient chip there, and that 94.5 degrees. So fan noise, here's a sample, worst case scenario running a benchmark. Yes, you will hear it, and this is using the function key F. We can control here the performance mode. So you've got whisper standard, but for all the benchmarks in gaming, I do keep it in the performance mode.
So as you may have gathered, I'm very fond of this laptop. The Qualcomm X2 Elite Extreme Performance has simply just blown me away with how good it is. CPU performance and those CPU benchmarks bettering Panther Lake, even the 388H that I covered in the ZenBook Duo 2026. Betters that. However, the Panther Lake integrated graphics at ARC performance, no, it can't better that, but it's a huge step up from the previous generation. We're looking at around 2.3 times better GPU performance, which was needed, because that was the biggest letdown of the previous model, was the graphics performance. Now you can even get away with playing some games with some decent frame rates on this, just lowering down the settings. Fantastic to see that. Now it uses less energy, less wattage, and the battery life on this, if you put it in the whisper mode or standard, is phenomenal for a Windows laptop, that it will go for around 11-12 hours of light web use at 30% brightness and keeping it just to that light use. Now, if you step it up to video editing and you put it in the performance mode, because the performance mode is exactly the same performance as when plugged in on the battery, it will not last that long, around about 2 to 3 hours if you're doing very demanding work, like editing and exporting videos, I found. So bear that in mind. Battery life, yes, is fantastic, but only for light, really web browsing, office, video playback, that kind of stuff there. So the laptop's keyboard, great backlit, touchpad, great screen, the Lumina OLED, love it. 16:10 aspect ratio works very well. I love the fact that this is very thin too, 16.5 millimeters. And then it is just 1.2 kilos. So portable, great to carry around. Is it a perfect laptop? No. The biggest con is its pricing. And we've seen this now across the board with all laptops because of, well, the RAM apocalypse, RAM prices going up. That 48 gigabytes of RAM in this comes at a cost. And it is, my configuration at the time of this video, over 2,000 euros. It's about 2,300 for this spec with the top chipset in here. And that to me is just, I think, too much really for what it is. Sure, the performance is beating Panther Lake's top-end chips, but there is some still, not compatibility, but software that's not fully taking advantage of that hardware. For example, Adobe Premiere Pro. I can encode videos, but only using software encoding and not hardware encoding. If it was hardware, it would be faster. So I need to wait for Adobe to fix that. Linux support, still can't boot, well, at least I haven't been able to boot any of my Linux distros on this. eGPUs, I like to use an RTX 4090 eGPU setup that I have, but it will detect it, Windows. However, there's no driver. There's no driver for me to run the eGPU. And that's a little bit disappointing. And I hope eventually that driver is going to be out. We'll get eGPU support with ARM. That's fantastic. Adobe will add ARM hardware encoding support too. So eventually we are getting there, but it's just not quite there. And really, if they can work on that pricing, then I would recommend this laptop, because the ZenBook A16, fantastic package here, just not quite perfect. As I mentioned there, we're almost there. So thank you so much for watching this review.